So Barack Obama's proposal for next year's U.S. budget has set up a showdown with Republicans over the depth of those cutbacks. The president says his $3.7 trillion budget request will end up saving $1 trillion over the coming years. Now, it includes cuts to energy, transport, housing, and other programs popular with his fellow Democrats. But Republicans are, of course, saying it doesn't go far enough towards slashing a deficit, which is set to hit $1.6 trillion this year. That's almost 11% of U.S. GDP. So for another assessment of Obama's budget, what's at stake, I'm joined by Dominic Dyer, founder and executive director of the American-European Institute. So the criticism seems to be right now that this budget, not ambitious enough, cuts don't go deep enough.
The president's moved. If you look at his State of the Union address, he had $400 billion on the table. He's now put $1.1 trillion on the table, and I think he obviously is coming under pressure from the Republicans to deal with the deficit. And he's taken some difficult decisions which could affect his supporters, cutting back on social programs, heating allowances for poor people, some of the environmental projects in the Great Lakes, some defense projects. But Republicans obviously feel it hasn't gone far enough. But there's a real debate in Washington now on the deficit.
And interesting stuff in today's FT's Lex column, that any reduction in the budget deficit will mean household and companies will have to take a hit equivalent to 7% of GDP over the next 4 years. That's according to budget forecasts.
And I think that's the critical issue. There is a debate in America now about are they living beyond their means, but they're looking at economies like the UK where we're cutting back significantly in public expenditure and we're seeing our economy slow down. So I think there is a view to see how far the American economy can grow before you make those cuts. The president has a period of time to really negotiate his position ahead of the elections. But after the presidential elections, if he gets re-elected, he could face the Republican Senate and Congress, and I think he's going to find it very difficult not really to try and make significant cuts.
So where does this all leave attempts to bring down America's budget deficit, particularly when you've got the likes of PIMCO saying, look, we're going to halve our holdings of U.S. Treasuries?
Well, I think it's important. The only country in the G20 this year that will have an increasing deficit is the United States. In the next 10 years, that could reach $13 trillion. And I think Americans are rightly concerned about that. But then you've got to cut back on Medicaid, Medicare, these big social programs.
But they're not touching these programs.
Not touching that, and even the Republicans aren't talking about that. Again, I think beyond 2012, they will become pressing issues. And it'll be interesting to see what even happens in the next few weeks, because you've got the 2011 budget that hasn't been approved, and you could see a potential lockdown in government like we saw in the 1990s with Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich if we don't resolve the problems that we have with the existing budget at the moment.
Conflicting views about whether or not the recovery in the US is on a firm footing at the moment. How much pain would deeper cuts cause for families, businessmen, investors?
I think real pain. You'd see teachers being laid off, policemen being laid off. A lot of that stimulus package went into maintaining jobs in those areas to stop people being laid off. If you start cutting back now, even a public sector pay freeze, which is on the table, will cause real pain. But if you start cutting back like we're seeing in the UK economy at the moment, it will cause a lot of pain at a very difficult time.
Under Obama's proposed budget at the moment, I understand only a quarter of the planned deficit reduction actually comes from tax rises. Is there more room to maneuver there? Could tax rises take on more of the burden, if you like?
Possibly, and those tax rises are really removing loopholes from various, tax loopholes for big energy companies, for example, where he's going to find some extra money. But I think that is an option, yes. I think tax rises are on the way. There's no doubt about it.
So how concerned should the US be at this point about its long-term creditworthiness?
I think there has to be concern on both sides of the aisle, and I think a recognition that you have to tackle this problem. I think the debate is beginning to come back to where we were in the 1990s when you saw that the Clinton administration have to address it with the Republicans, and I think we're going to find that no matter what the result of the 2012 election is.
Will the bond markets force a reality check, shall we say, on the US?
I think so, yes. I think, at the end of the day, there's a lot of politics in this, a lot of manoeuvring, trying to make sure that one camp doesn't sort of lose out to the other by making certain cuts. But these problems are real. The Americans can't put this off forever.